Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to the August Roll for TBR, my TBRPG, and I am happy to announce that I got a nat win for July. Kind of. There's a little bit of an asterisk to it. We'll get into it later. But regardless, I am leveling up. I will be rolling for 9 books for the month of August with a +3 modifier. And I got 6 review books read, which means I am sitting at 2 re-rolls. In general, I'm really happy with how well I did in July. Even though the month's not done yet, technically. It's like the 26th as I film this. I just got it done that quickly. And I'm pretty sure I'm not going to get another 3 review books read by the end of the month. If I do, and I really want to, I could come back and do another re-roll. But that +3 modifier usually carries a lot of the weight. Regardless, exactly what did I read in July? So the first prompt was for classic, and for that one I picked Kindred by Octavia Butler. This is considered a classic in both science fiction and Black literature, and I've been intending to read it for forever, ever since I picked it up from a used bookstore, and I decided to go with it for the Booktubeathon challenge that I did, because I decided a book all about slavery in the antebellum South would just pair so perfect with a giant challenge where I'm reading 6 books in a week. But oddly enough, it worked out better than I thought. It was as shattering as I was afraid of, but it was that kind of you have to keep reading grippy intrigue. This is all about a woman who is pulled back in time to the antebellum South just as this young boy is drowning, and she saves him and finds herself essentially being pulled back and forth, and she's not really sure why. I do like the reason that she theorizes why she's being pulled back specifically for this young boy when he is seemingly always in danger, and it deals a lot with the politics or the culture of slavery on a plantation, and just how plantation owners would keep a grip on the enslaved peoples around them, how they would turn enslaved peoples against each other and create resentments, or they would encourage connections and families to be built just to lessen the chance that one of them might want to run away. It was so dark and so much nuance. I actually looked up an interview from Octavia Butler, and she mentioned that she wrote this when she heard some youth at the time, and this was the 1970s, talking about how, their ancestors must have just been too weak to run away, I'm built different, like that kind of vibe. And so she wanted to do an in-depth look at what living on a plantation was actually like for enslaved people. And I liked the vibe of comparing modern day community-based issues with a previous one, because one of my favorite musicals, my favorite indie musical, The View Upstairs, does this exact same premise but with the queer community, where a person travels back in time into the queer community of the 1970s, comparing and contrasting it to today. And I really love that concept for that, so I loved how much it was shown through here. The ending is properly dark. It is a very dark book. There's all of the trigger warnings you would expect with a book that very blatantly shows you slavery on a plantation. Like, it doesn't hold any punches. I think the only thing that doesn't happen is you don't see on-page essay. Like, there's talk about it. It's a thing, but you don't see it on page, except for that attempted one at that one point. You don't see it completed on-page essay, let's say that, but it's very intense. However, very much worth the read, a lot to think about. Up next was the prompt middle grade, and for this one I picked a review book, Wasteland Woes by Isaac Cook Khan. This is a mid-grade post-apocalyptic novella about a pair of siblings and their dog trying to survive in the apocalypse. And the synopsis made mention that it was all about the sister having to go on a trek across the wasteland to save her brother who has been injured and is in need of help. But that's not the crux of the story. Just pure page count wise, the majority of the story is spent focusing on the dog. It actually starts from the dog's point of view, and her losing her previous owner and finding the siblings and all of that. So I was a little bit confused by that. The actual inciting incident from the synopsis doesn't start until 2/3 of the way in the short story. And it is fairly short. And I have learned very recently with multiple examples that short form media is an art form that is a lot trickier than people think, because it's not just, oh, you write a little less than if you were writing a novel. It is very easy to make it feel like you left things out in a short story like this, and you definitely feel it here. I wish there'd been so much more build up. I wish there'd been so much more focus on like the actual wasteland in itself. It feels like she's just strolling through without a lot of issue, because it doesn't actually want to create any big scenes or issues that will have to be solved, because it's so short. So it's just kind of, she walks through and sees things and moves on. So I am not going to continue with this series, but I am always glad to get more middle grade reviews out there. Up next, I had the prompt Monster Romance. For this one, I went with Bound by Tiffany Roberts. This is the third in the Spider's Mate trilogy, and I was so excited to get to this one, even as much as I was nervous, because the second one ended on such a gigantic cliffhanger, and I loved this one. Like, I'm so glad I picked this one for the booktubeathon, because I would like go to read 50 pages, and then I'd end up reading 100 because I just didn't want to stop. It was so good. I loved all the survival aspects. I loved the fact that the setting got a lot more time to shine, because the previous two books, the Tangle was still a place, but they weren't doing as much like exploring in it, whereas this one was mostly exploring and all of the dangers, and you got to see whole new characters, and it came full circle, and it had a dramatic big fight in a rainy jungle. Like, it was great. Obviously, I can't tell you very much because the second book had such a gigantic cliffhanger, but I'm so glad I finished this one. I am definitely going to have to look up this author duo's other work. It is definitely worth all of the praise it has gotten in the Monster Romance community, and it's so good. Probably one of the big highlights of the entire month for me. Up next was the prompt nonfiction, so I went with Not My Time to Die by Lily Setterdahl. This is a record of the Swedish passengers of the Titanic, written by a Swedish American. So there are some things in here that are the only English translations of certain articles from Swedish newspapers or Swedish journal accounts, that kind of thing. And I was really intrigued by that idea. I, like many kids, went through a Titanic phase in my preteen years, so I was really intrigued by this. But I will say the setup for it was very, very dry. And obviously, yes, it's nonfiction, it's history. But as someone with a history degree, there is an art form to writing nonfiction in such a way that you still feel like there is a story being told. It's just that that story is true. And a lot of this had extraneous information that just didn't need to be in there. Like, there would be what parish their parents were born in, which didn't need to be added. And it definitely felt like the author wanted to include literally every single thing she'd ever researched, when you do have to cut out a lot of what you researched to make a cohesive narrative. Yes, even in a nonfiction book. But I was still struck by a lot of the ideas. It talks about what my immigration setup in Sweden was like, how a lot of Swedish men would have to sneak into Denmark because they couldn't get permission to leave, because the king essentially wanted them to be stuck there to then be forced into military service. So they would have to sneak into another country and then get immigration tickets from there and leave the country. Or there was a lot of talk about, again, first-person survivor stories. But what I was surprised by was how ethnocentric the Swedes on board were, because so many of these stories were blatantly well, yes, the Swedish passengers were all acting calmly on the deck as it was sinking, but those Italians, there was a lot of that. Just a lot of, oh, the Swedish, the Germans, and the English, all good, but those Italians, those whatever, they're the bad ones. I specifically remember there was one of the survivor accounts talked about how they were upset at how swarthy the crew members of the Carpathia were. For reference, the Carpathia is the one that saved the survivors. Is the reason the survivors got saved, or they would have basically all died at sea in the lifeboats. And I'm like, you're gonna critique that crew. That crew you're gonna critique? So there was a lot of that. Obviously, there was a lot of sad parts talking about all the people that died. But the setup for it, again, it read more like just a list of sources researched rather than having a more cohesive narrative. instead of talking about whole family groups together, they would split them up between survivors and deceased. And I'm like, no, like talk about the whole family together. Like that's a family group that's culturally together. Keep them culturally together in the book and talk about how the deaths affected people. Like there was a, it was just a very weird setup. I would definitely see this more as like a book to use to research rather than the best secondary source in itself. But I am still glad I read it. I learned more things. I got to relive my Titanic obsession for a hot minute, and now I can hopefully move on to lighter books. Up next was the prompt Queer Author, and for this one I picked A Lady to Treasure by Marian Ratcliffe, another review book, although the review isn't even going to be coming out until October, because that's when the book is coming out, but this is a Sapphic Regency romance, and the minute I heard that, like I don't even think I read most of the email that I got before I decided to accept this one for review. I just like, gay Regency romance. I was a little bit iffy on what level of queer norm it was going to be, and it definitely rides the line, where it's like, no, not queer norm, but like no one is directly confronted with homophobia. They make vague references to the, the female friends living together, a Boston marriage type setup. And they more or less keep their feelings for each other a secret out of like pride, or they need to marry a rich dude or whatever, rather than fear of being found out as queer. But in general, I did like it. Sarah and Louisa are kind of dumbasses at times. And that whole, someone goes to make a big declaration only to get confused or get turned away and suddenly things turn dramatic. But I did like a lot of the plot points. It got very melodramatic at times. There were a lot of fun side characters. There were also annoying antagonists. The only thing I was not a fan of, and the only reason I took off a star, was because there were certain moments that I wish had played out directly in the narrative rather than being kind of like vaguely talked over. Specifically, there was one antagonist that got their comeuppance, but only in vague terms and like a quick overview. I'm like, no. You built that antagonist up really well. I hate them. I want to see the comeuppance happen in real time. Don't gloss over that. But regardless, I still really enjoyed this book, and it's going to be a while before any of you can read it, because again, it won't be out until October. But if you're willing to wait that long, it's a great pick. So this next one is where the asterisk to my win comes in. Now, the prompt was monster romance. I originally picked Rook by Julian Graves. I was really excited for this one. It's on my most anticipated, and it was supposed to come out July 8th. I double checked, triple checked, quadruple checked, making sure July 8th. Okay, and then a couple days before it came out, or was supposed to come out, I went to pre-order it because I finally opened a slot on my TBR, only to find out, JK, the release date got moved back to October. Now, I thought about if this would count as a quote-unquote dirty win because I had to replace the book, but I would have read that. I'm really excited for it. I'm really bummed that it got moved back. And so I've decided that if I literally cannot get access to that book that I plan to read and I have to replace it, that's not going to count against me. I did not have a way to read that book at all. In the future, I just might have to be a little more careful about putting anticipated reads that aren't released on TBRs, but I instead picked My Jurassic Mate by Michelle Demos. This was another monster romance, also on my anticipated reads that did come out. So I read this one. This is all about a group of 12 women that are sent to this alien planet with 3 separate tribes of aliens, and they are basically all picked ahead of time because the science people that are sending them know they will end up being mates with all of the 12 people. Now, I wanted to like this book. There's another book that this author has coming out this year that I am like so ultra hyped for. Not until December, unfortunately, but I was really pumped for this one. However, I just did not vibe. I think part of the problem is that trying to introduce literally 24 characters in a single romance book is just too much. It tried so hard to introduce so many characters and you just don't get a feel for it. And now romance books have a long storied tradition of introducing side characters with the express purpose that those side characters are going to become protagonists in later books. But there's kind of like an art form to it. You really only have the protagonists of like 2 to 3 books out being really involved in the first book's plot. You really cannot set up 12 books worth of romantic interests in a single book. It just does not work. And also, I don't like books where the male character has to be taught that women deserve rights and agency. I'm over it. That's just, no. Oh yeah, she has to teach him that he can't treat women like that. Like, no, we deserve better. We deserve not having to be settled with men that we have to teach basic human rights to. Like, no, I'm over that. So I will not be continuing with this series, but I am still really, really invested in this author's anticipated upcoming work that will come out in December, because it gives me all kind of good, if Nutcracker was a monster romance vibes, and I need that one so bad. So I'll take the L with this one. Won't be continuing, but I'm still looking forward to the next one. The next prompt was a review book, and for this one I went with Bloodstained Rose by Angie Titus. This is a paranormal mystery about a woman who moves in with her uncle because he's injured to help him around the house, and discovers that his house is haunted and the ghost was a murder victim, and she decides she wants to solve the murder because she is a mystery writer that has teamed up with a detective before. And in general, I really wanted to like this one. Unfortunately, it felt, again, this has been a recurring issue, it felt like an excerpt of a larger book. Like, I did not feel like I knew the full story. I feel like there were things that happened before the beginning of the book that I should have seen, and things that happened after the book that I should have seen. I honestly thought when I got this one that the author had like sent me a second or third book in a series, because the synopsis made it sound like that. So I was kind of surprised to find out that it's the first book. And again, it's one of those, it was just too short. I needed more, or I needed at least them to cut out some of the more extraneous parts. It didn't really feel like the characters were doing a lot to solve the mystery, because a lot of the clues and info was just straight up given to them. The ghost herself presented with information, or they just flat out had dreams that directly stated what happened. Like, I wish there'd been more research, dead ends, red herrings, that kind of thing. It was spooky. I did like the pining between our protagonists, even if nothing comes of it. But in general, it was a very quick read. I just was left feeling like I hadn't read a full book, if that makes sense, which again has been so regularly happening lately. I don't know if it's me. I don't know if I just need to give up reading any book under 250 pages or what, but definitely a recurring theme in my reading lately. The last prompt was monster romance. Yes, my nieces did me such a solid when they rolled for me last month. And for this one, I went with Sanctuary with Kings by Catherine Moon. I was a little nervous because this one also hadn't been published when I put it on the TBR, but thankfully, this one actually came out. So this is the third in the Tempting Monsters trilogy, and it is all about a succubi who meets a polycule of monsters, and they all get together. This is also the last in the trilogy, so it is where they finally go to confront the big bad. And I really wanted to like this one, but I think I liked it less than the second one still, mostly because as the polycule was forming, you had one member that was straight up just, I don't want to share you type of vibe, which I thought we had moved past that, because there was a character with that vibe in book one, but book two didn't have that nearly at all. Like, the only reason characters in that book were sad that the female protagonist wanted to hook up with the other guys is because they were afraid that that meant that they couldn't be with her. And when she was like, no dude, I want all of you, they're like, okay, cool, fine then. But in this case, there was one dude that was like, I claimed you first, and all of that kind of like territorial stuff, which is not why I read a polycule romance. Like, if I'm reading a polyam romance, I want everyone to be chill. And it's weird. I don't want to have to, again, I don't want to have to watch a man be taught to respect a woman's wishes. I'm not here for it. I liked all the other characters. It was just that running through line, because it was that character that kept the entire polycule from feeling like a complete polycule until so far into the book, and I was really bummed about that. There was also a scene that was just straight up fan service, like existed for nothing but fan service, where all three of the polycules from the trilogy are in the same place and there's a giant orgy. Like, I get it, she knows her audience. I do wish the giant battle at the end had been way more drawn out. Like, this is the big bad and the big battle to end the big bad. Like, I wanted so much more. Like, I almost wish that this had been a whole other book. So, like, the first 3 books in the series had been each of the polycules getting together, and then there was a 4th book where they actually make the big gun-ho, we're gonna take this dude down. I did like the agency the female characters had in it, how basically at the end of the day they were the ones that had to face the big bad directly because they had certain powers over him in the way of like fear and manipulation that the others didn't have. I like that aspect. I love a good big battle, and we didn't get that. And or rather, we didn't get that on page. It was more like, again, a vague overview. I wanted more. Regardless, I mean, still great sex scenes, which is, why you read a monster romance. So I'll give it that. But maybe not as, I didn't like it as much as I hyped it. I think the second one is still the best. Yes, still the best. So that was July. Now we're moving on to August. I don't have any big plans for my reading specifically in August. I definitely need to prioritize review books. However, I don't have any like readathons or anything going on. I'm not doing any challenges or anything like that. I do want to make sure I add at least a couple easier, lighter books for that first week of school in case I get too stressed, so I'm not overloading myself. So even if I get a lot of review books, that would have to be for the earlier part of the month. Now, we do have 2 rerolls, and I gotta make sure to use those. I'm getting a little bit better at using them, but I still forget. And we got that +3 modifier, which means the first couple of prompts won't ever come up, and I love that. So, 9 times, let's go. Okay, so I'm gonna pull back the curtain to behind the scenes here. I do all of the rolls in one sitting, get all of the prompts, then sit down and figure out what books to go with them. And this is the most frustrated I've been putting together a TBR list since I started this game. It was so frustrating because I just did not have books to fill most of these prompts. And that's part of the problem with the TBR challenge that I'm in right now, is that as the TBR gets smaller and smaller, a randomized TBR game gets harder and harder. So I ended up getting super frustrated, unhauled like 10 books, and bought some new ones. And then I just had to step away for a couple hours because I didn't want to come back and film this all when I was in a really bad mood. So it's like well into the evening now as I film this, when it was early afternoon when I began. But I did get books picked, and I am feeling pretty confident-ish about it. So, what am I reading in August? Since I just saw the Barbie movie, we're going with the pink die. Come on, be with me, Barbie. Barbie is not with me. Yeah, I just looked at what a 6 would be. We're rolling that. Second chance, pink die. Okay. 5 + 3 is 8, and that is the prompt 400 plus pages. This one took me a little bit to find one that was over 400. And for this one, I went with NACL, Eye of the Storm by Allegra Pescatore and E. Sands. This is a kind of sci-fi action-adventure about a planet with a bunch of salt being controlled by this evil corporation and a group of pirates that goes against the evil corporation and sails out to get more salt, I think. Admittedly, I do not know that much about this one. I'm reading it mostly because I love Allegra Pescatore's work, and I'm pretty sure there's going to be more disaster queers in this one, which is really all that I need. I don't know much about E. Sands, but I've loved every Pescatore book I've read so far, so I have high hopes for this one. I've had it on my list for forever, and I keep pushing it off because it is over 500 pages. So maybe this will be the thing that finally pushes me to do it, but again, this is probably one of those books that I need to read earlier in the month. Am I the superstitious TTRPG player that switches die when one rolls low? Yes, I am. 7 + 3 is 10, and that is the prompt nonfiction. I actually just got one. So we're going to go with Bewitching the Elements by Gabriella Herstick. This is a neo-pagan spiritual book, and I have been working my way through different elements of my own Brigidine paganism journey, and so I was really looking forward to finding more books, and I was super happy to find this one in a thrift store, although the cover is a little bit wonky, but that just means it was well loved. Regardless, I don't know how much I'm going to get from this. romance. That's kind of the thing with paganism, is you take what feels right to you, and it doesn't have to look exactly a specific way. But I definitely need help with meditation. That one I always forget to do. So I'm hoping that some of the stuff in here will help me with that, at least. And also just the vibe of the book seems like pretty fun. So I'm looking forward to reading it for that as well. Come on, dice gods. Really? 9 plus 3 is 12, and that is for the prompt ebook. And for this one, I went with Reforged by Seth Haddon. This is a queer fantasy romance about a paladin dude that was in a relationship with the prince at one point, but basically broke it off so he could rise through the ranks of the paladin order and become the king's top bodyguard. But then just as he gets to that king bodyguard level, the king is assassinated, and the prince he abandoned becomes the new king he has to protect. And that sounds so angsty. I'm expecting a lot of pining. It's a second chance romance. I'm expecting a lot of melodrama. We have an assassination, and then of course the king's enemies are going to try again with the new king, and so now our paladin has to protect the man he's still in love with but had to have all of these conflicts with. Like, I'm expecting just peak levels of Shakespearean melodrama here. I'm gonna try to make this one of the books that I probably read towards the end of the month with school starting, but I might get too excited and read it earlier, and I hope I can avoid the temptation, because I might be screwing myself over if I do that. All right, could we roll over 10, maybe? Apparently not. And once again, I am re-rolling because I really don't want a 6. Oh, there we go. 18 plus 3 would technically be 21, but my prompts only go up to 20. So that's monster romance. And for this one, I went with Rescued by the Married Monster Hunters by Enos Rook Bash. This is a queer polyam monster romance about this monster that was living in a dimension, in a dungeon type thing, doing his monster thing, and then decides that he doesn't want to do that anymore. So he escapes, disguises himself as a human, and gets rescued by the titular Married Monster Hunters, and of course starts falling in love with them. But oh no, they're monster hunters and he's a monster. So it's all of this like tension and angst and pining. Now it is a romance, so I think we can all pretty much guess how it's going to end, but I like the angst and pining anyway. And there's a lot of really fun rep in here, like disaster bisexuals and disability. And I, yes, technically still am trying to build my list of disability and neurodivergence in genre fiction part 2. I swear I'm going to come out with it sometime this year, you guys. But I'm just hoping that this one is as pining, angsty, melodramatic kitsch as I'm hoping. And also, you know, bisexuals with swords. It's going to be a good time. Okay. Let's keep up the good vibes. And good vibes. 8 plus 3 is 11, and that is for the prompt, a short story or poetry collection. I actually had to go to my inbox and look through the review requests still pending to find one, and I went with Changelings, an autistic trans anthology. This is not published by any specific publishing press, as far as I can tell. It's done by 2 freelance editors, A.R. Vale and Ocean, and I've reviewed some of A.R. Vale's work before, so I was intrigued by that. And this appears to be a anthology all about trans, masc, and non-binary autistic people in a variety of situations. I don't know much more than that. In a lot of cases, when I do these kind of anthologies, it's like trans people in a horror setting or queer women in nautical settings. There's a little bit more to go off of rather than just general representation only. So I'm not exactly sure what to expect of the vibe of this one. I'm a little cautious about the curation style, but I am excited to read another queer anthology. I just, actually gotta get the copy. Like I said, I had to go to my inbox to make this work. So really hoping I can get this one. Okay, let's bring it back before I need to change dice again. Okay. 10 plus 3, that is science fiction. For this one, I was a good kid. I went back to the book I need to read, and that is Trial and Error by Oleander Bloom. This is the sequel in the Caring for Your Clown series, a series all about a clown-like creature coming into our world, but like also kind of interdimensional being that just took on the form of a clown. It's very weird sci-fi stuff, but the first book was intense. It dealt directly with transphobia and abusive relationships and like having to deal with like court systems and stuff. And this one promises to be worse. So this is definitely going to be one that I need to read in the beginning of the month. I don't think I'm going to do the audiobook this time just because trying to listen to the audiobook for the first one, hearing another human reading that level of horrible thing aloud, I actually ended up finding myself more focusing on what the audiobook narrator was thinking than the words themselves. So I think we are going to stick to the e-copy with this one. And yes, I am going to have to read it early in the month to get it out of the way before the stress of the school year begins, and maybe like split it up with some of the lighter books just to make sure that I'm not bringing myself too far down. But I am excited to get back to this series. I like all the weird interdimensional clown stuff.
Screw it, we're changing dice again. There we go.
18 plus 3, again, another monster romance. But here's the thing. I didn't have any other monster romances, so I had to start looking. And by looking, I mean I typed monster romance into the search bar in Amazon. And I found Rock Hard Gargoyle by Maggie Mayhem. This is a modern-esque monster romance where there's still a lot of the same ideas of a contemporary romance, but involving monsters. The premise sounds kind of similar to C.M. Nascosta's Cambric Creek series. However, the monsters are still a relatively new thing. Like, everyone knows they exist, they're not hidden, but it mentions that, like, the first monster-human wedding is happening. And our protagonist is a bridal gown designer who ends up having to crash that wedding and comes face-to-face with a gargoyle security dude. And then later on, when she has someone stalking her and she signs up for a security detail, guess who shows up to be her bodyguard? That's right, it's a grumpy bodyguard romance. Love it! And yes, I probably should have looked at other authors that I looked at before to continue their work, but I also just wanted something new. It's been a while since I've jumped into a new monster romance that I haven't read before, and I love gargoyle romances. I'm low-key considering a gargoyle romance rec list, and this would go on that. And I might read it early in the month. I think this might be the book I cut in with trial and error, because I already started reading the snippet to make sure I wanted to buy it, and I wanted to keep reading, so I don't know how much I'm going to be able to push it off. I could probably wait until August 1st, but probably not that much longer after that.
All right, keep it up, my brown friend. Yeah!
Okay, I have no idea where the footage for this one went, but for my Nat 20, another monster romance, I went with Rigoru by S.J. Sanders. This is a prequel to the book Red, and I loved that book, and it is all about humans newly arrived to this alien planet, which I didn't even know it was an alien planet in Red, but they are just discovering the titular Rigoru, who are these wolf dudes that travel in trios, and so it's a polyam romance, and we find the first human going out to investigate a sighting in the Forbidden Woods and ends up finding a trio, but they are not what the sighting was about. So the mystery is what else is in the woods with them. I'm really looking forward to hopefully seeing how the society became what it became in Red, because this book appears to have like current or high-tech scientific technology, whereas Red is basically like a medieval society. So something happened, and I'm hoping we get to see what, or at least the start of what, in this book. But in general, I've loved most of this author's work, and it was really the only monster romance of the previous authors I read that like looked any good for some reason. I just must be so picky lately. I don't know what it is, but I am looking forward to this one.
All right, my friend, you have understood the assignment. One last one, let's go. Okay.
And lastly, 9 plus 3 equals 12. That is another ebook. And for this one, I went with The Temple of Forgotten Secrets by C.J. Archer. This is the fourth book in the After the Rift series, and it is all about a mysterious palace that just sprang up overnight. No one remembers it being constructed, and our protagonist, a physician's daughter, discovers that no one within the palace has any memories of their time before it. So the series follows as she tries to unravel things and has a will they, won't they with the captain of the guard. Now, I am of a very split mind about this book because I always enjoy it as I'm reading it. It always goes by really fast. There's a lot of mysteries to it. But after I finish, inevitably I start thinking about things again, and I'm like, there are some things that had a weird tinge to it. Like the fact that literally every book there is a new antagonist sexually harassing, if not sexually assaulting the protagonist. And it comes to a point where it's like, okay, we can come up with other kinds of conflict. We don't have to do that. Or just in general, the protagonist is not a Mary Sue, but like has a lot of Mary Sue vibes, where it's like everyone in the story is just a little too fixated on her for it to make sense, since she is this peasant physician's daughter from the village. Like, she should not matter that much to palace people, but she does. It's kind of weird like that, but I can't lie that I don't enjoy myself while I'm reading them. It's just a weird relationship I have with this series, and I want to know the secrets, and I want to see things resolved, and I want to see the slow burn romance come to fruition. So I'm just gonna, deal with the cognitive dissonance. So that is my TBR for August. Bad news, I only got 2 review books on there. Good news, I got a lot of indie books on there, all but one, and August is Indie August. So I've got that going for me at least. But in general, I'm definitely feeling the pressure of the TBR challenge. I can't imagine how people get all the way down to 0. I am at like 66 as I film this, and I'm already feeling it. And I want to keep going. I want to get down to that 50. I want to meet that goal. But it is so hard to do with a randomized TBR game. And there's a part of me that's like genuinely wondering if I try to get to 10, get to the level up part where I roll for 10 books and then consider that the win, and then use the rest of the year to read books in such a way that I can get that TBR down to that 50. Let me know if you'd be interested in watching just straight up TBR videos without the randomized element. I know the TBR games tend to be more fun, but I want to say I got my TBR down to 50 at least once before I end my booktube career. Not that I plan on ending it anytime soon. It's just a thing. Regardless, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.